In the first video, we looked at the E or the I, the extroversion and the introversion types. And now we're going to look at S or N. So S is for sensing, N is for intuitive. I know N, intuitive starts with an I, but the I was already taken for introversion. So N is the initial that we use for the intuitive type. Now, if we're looking at this as a general overview, it's really essentially how we determine whether we like and trust the information that we are being exposed to. It also is like the determinant of how we deal with that information. Like, how do we approach all of these different tasks? How do we think about the world in general? And so people who prefer sensing tend to be driven most by fact and proof. They rely on experience of themselves or other people, and they utilize that to determine whether they trust something. So if they can't sense it, like use the senses, they can see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, hear it. And even then, that may not be enough information. People who prefer intuition tend to not really need proof. They trust their gut, and they also tend to focus on more imaginative and theoretical possibilities, big picture thinking, as opposed to what does the proof tell us. So, for instance, an intuitive type might look at like, let's say they're house hunting. Let's say we have a couple, one is a sensing type, one is an intuitive type. The sensing type will walk into a fixer-upper and be like, look around you. Present reality says this place needs way, way, way too much work. And the intuitive type will think beyond what's right in front of them and say, yeah, but imagine the possibilities here. What if we did this and we could do this? And they're already decorating that house, whereas the sensing type can't even think past what's right in front of them. All right, so looking at this in terms of like more stereotypical ideals of what sensing and intuition might show up as, the sensing type likes what they know. So the sensing types, like, the shapes I know are triangle, rectangle, square, and circle. And the intuitive types like, yeah, but what about all the things we don't know? And I know this is sort of a silly way to think about it, but the intuitive type is not limited by what is already known. They are intrigued by the things they don't know yet. And in a more concrete version of what this looks like, the intuitive type is so big picture thinking. They want to tackle everything that's happening around them. We need to change the world. And the sensing type is all about that present reality. Let's start with the dishes. I have to admit, this one shows up in my relationship a lot. I think for both of us, my partner and I have some elements of intuitive capability, and then the other always seems to show up as the sensing type in those moments. So he might have this like, oh, we're going to take on this big picture thing. And I'm like, why don't you do the dishes? And then when I'm like, I'm going to take on the world, and he's like, let's start by cleaning up the house. So we kind of balance each other out in that way. All right, so let's take a look at the facets that make up sensing and intuition. So the first is concrete and abstract. This is a core facet of the S and N dichotomy, and it essentially allows us to recognize how we generally perceive the world and the kinds of things that we're going to direct our attention to. So the concrete type wants to work with and talk about things that are verifiable and tangible. If it's beyond the facts that exist right in front of them and can be verified and shown as proven as true, they're not really interested, or they're very cautious about that. The abstract is all about interpretive meaning. So they might take things that exist and say, yeah, but what about the thing that happens between them? Like, what about the connections? I recognize, so one thing that I am like having an aha moment about right now is that those of you who are concrete are probably struggling a little bit more with the discussion board posts, because even though you have all of these facts, right, you have all of the definitions for the concepts that exist in the textbook, I'm asking you to make connections between ideas. I'm asking you to think in abstract ways. And that means there is no right or wrong. You, if you're more concrete, are like, what if this is wrong? What if this connection isn't right? And I'm asking you to think more abstractly. So I'm having this moment of like recognition here, and I apologize for those of you who are concrete that it might be a little bit more difficult for you. If you're struggling with that, please let me know. But yeah, that abstract type is like, I don't need the connections and the interpretations laid out for me. I like to make those connections myself. All right, the realistic and imaginative type is all about developing new things and how a person deals with the tasks that show up day to day. So whether it's a new task or like getting used to doing a new task, there's the realistic approach, which is all about common sense and experience and comfort and security. And so the realistic type likes to do things that feel comfortable, that feel secure, that are not thinking outside the box too much with new ways of doing things. They rely on experience. So like if they've done it before, then they're going to do it the way that they've always done it, because that experience determines like a more positive outcome. If they haven't done it before, they're going to watch several YouTube video tutorials and read a manual and really try to better understand what other people have done. And that creates comfort and security to achieve the task. Whereas the imaginative type is all about the possibilities, what if, and maybe we could reinvent how to do this. And so oftentimes they do reinvent how to do things. So they're always sort of thinking like beyond the manual and beyond what's kind of like right in front of them or what other people have done. So they might change up the recipe. They might watch the tutorial and then say, well, what I could do better is this. And they tend to think, bigger sometimes than what they are actually capable of doing. All right, the practical and the conceptual is all about the product or the outcome of perception, not about the process itself. So the practical type really likes familiarity, and they like to follow the instructions. So the realistic type utilizes the tutorials and the instructions to create comfort in approaching the task. The practical type, it's actually about doing the task, not just about approaching it, it's about doing it. And so they will follow those instructions. They're not a risk taker at all. They're not going to do things that don't feel super safe to them, or at least known. Whereas the conceptual is really willing to take those risks, thinking like maybe something much better will come out of it. So even in taking on like a task around the house, that the conceptual is like, well, I don't know how to do that. That's okay. I can see how it's going to come together. I don't worry about the details of making it come together. I'm willing to try something new, because maybe we come up with something that's like totally works and is easier to do. And meanwhile, the practical person shaking their head, like, that's not how it works. We have to do it the way it's done. I speak about this one from experience too. I think this shows up a lot in my relationship as well, where oftentimes my partner is very practical. I'm more conceptual. All right, the experiential and the theoretical is all about the process by which one makes knowledge or meaning of their perceptions. So it's, all right, can you see like we're walking through this, like how do I approach this thing? How do I do this thing? And then what do I get out of that? How does that make me think about future? And what the experiential type will say is that, hey, you know what? I used let's say it's doing a task they've never done before in a home repair, okay? Switching out a light fixture. That the realistic person is going to say, I am not comfortable doing this. I'm going to watch 7 YouTube videos. I'm going to read a manual. I'm going to get the product that the new light fixture. I'm going to read that manual. I'm going to have all my pieces laid out. And then I'm going to do it the way that process entails. And then at the end, the experiential person is going to say, hey, you know what? Experience matters. I used the approach that was tried and true, and it worked. And look, we have electricity and the light works. And the imaginative type is going to like watch a couple videos and what if we did, maybe rewiring a light's not the best example because you don't want to mess with electricity. But the imaginative type is going to think like, well, what if we did it this way instead? And the conceptual is not going to like worry about the detail. This conceptual person is going to start the project and then be like, oh, I need a certain bit for my screw. I don't have that bit because they don't have all the things that they need. And then the theoretical component's going to, at the end of the project, even if it works, maybe walk away and forget even how they did it. And the next time try something totally new. All right, the last is the traditional and the original, and this is all about the sort of the background that gives us the impression overall of being more sensing or intuitive. It's what drives the decisions to be concrete, realistic, practical, and experiential if you're traditional, and what drives the inclination to be abstract, imaginative, conceptual, or theoretical if you are original. And so the traditional type is going to show up in very traditional ways. This means they're actually going to look more traditional. They're going to make choices that are more traditional. The traditional type is going to buy a practical car that's not like a super bright color. You know, they are the silver Honda Civic of the Myers-Briggs types, whereas the original type is the orange Subaru Crosstrek of the Myers-Briggs types. The original type is gonna like have maybe a more unique haircut or color. They're going to wear trendy clothes and they're going to be interested in trends overall. They're going to decorate their house in ways that are more unique and maybe even choose a place to live that feels more unique and original. And the sensing type is going to make decisions that feel traditional, that feel practical, that feel realistic. You know, let's buy a, you know, traditional house in a good neighborhood in a city that's proven with real estate. And then let's decorate that house in very traditional ways. And the original type's like, no, let's do up and coming and let's do, you know, like let's think outside the box in all the ways that we approach that. So, all right, here we have our facets. Again, same thing I pointed out with the extroversion and introversion components is what I want you to do is read each of these facet handouts and highlight the things that stand out to you as being true for you and also what you perceive to be true of the other person. And, you know, I also think it's okay to give those handouts to that other person and say, hey, what about this stands out to you as being true of you? And then you can utilize their analysis of themselves, their own self-awareness to kind of figure out like, okay, so maybe why are we having this conflict over and over again? Or what makes us get along so well? That's how we determine some of those really interesting components of our relationship. And it's also how we improve our relationships. All right, so look for the next video on thinking and feeling. As always, contact me if you have questions.